Hola, y'all. This is Jay with Behind the Grind, the Professional GM Chronicles. We're here today with SnackDaddy Games, who's taking time out of his schedule to visit with us in regards to what makes a professional GM tick and kick and everything else, and just kind of share with us some tips and insights that will help us all as we try to consider professional DMing as a part-time gig or full-time gig, but also just become a better game master. If you have any interest in this at all, guys, I want to encourage you to smash that button like a mimic, share it like loot, and subscribe it before the bard steals the spotlight. All right. So, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Snack Daddy Games. And Snack Daddy, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm professional dungeon master. Been doing it full time for the last 2 years. I started part time back in 2022, and yeah, I've been DM since fifth edition since about 2015, 2016, playing home games, and then after the pandemic, started doing it part time. Did it good enough to be able to do it full time, and been doing it ever since then.
Very cool. If I remember right, looking at your Start Playing Games profile, you've got well over 1,000 games under your belt. Is that correct?
Just about. Some games get added on there that don't end up going, but most of them, yeah, been doing it 10 games, 10 to 11, sometimes 12 games a week for about 2 years now. So a lot of games.
Oh my gosh, are those like campaign games? Are they one shots? What's your
All
preference?
all campaigns. You might get into it later, but I do all campaigns for me. Most are all in my setting that I have, but I do a couple modules, like adventure modules. Like I got a couple Eve of Ruin games because people like running those. But yeah, almost all of them are campaigns. Haven't really been able to get one shots to work, but everybody really likes the campaigns.
You know what? You got a audience going. Obviously, that's a good thing. What first drew you into tabletop role playing games, and how did you become a game master?
Yeah, so it all started, like I said, back in like 2016 or so. Was interested in D&D, had never played it, and friends was always talking about it. And I was like, okay, cool, I want to play. And of course, friends were like, yeah, I'll set up a campaign. And then 6 months go by. Hey, how's that campaign coming? We gonna start? No, I haven't worked on it. Well, I want to play. My friends are like, why don't you play? I'm like, oh, I don't have the books. I don't have this, I don't have that. Like, here, you just get it for free. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'll do it. So it just started with me kind of being the only person willing to take the time or having the time to set it up and take control. And that's kind of how it all started all those years ago.
Very cool. Do you remember the first time you were running a game, and how did it go?
The very first session I ever ran, I think I still have a picture of it somewhere. Very first time, it was like a warm up for the campaign that we were going to be doing because I had never DM'd. So it was a little one shot in this homebrew world that I had been concocting. And it went great. It was four people. It was my roommate and a couple other friends who came over. They weren't all going to be in the campaign. And I found like a little one shot online. It was like a third party thing. I found just I don't know DM guild somewhere that was free and ran it. It was a simple little one shot. Went well, and ever since then it was history. That was the very beginning.
Oh, very cool. Um, what has been your most memorable campaign, and what about it made it stand out to you?
So the very most memorable one I think is I would call like the first campaign. It technically wasn't the first campaign. That was the one I was just telling you about. But
Uh
this
huh.
one was a couple years later with a different group of friends. And my best friend had a couple others. We started out playing just in like the back of a bar on Mondays. Like it was a local brewery, and they just let us play like in the back area. And eventually, my one friend joined. My best friend joined. He had a house. We started playing in an actual house, which was more accommodating. And it was just a really good long campaign where I really felt I knew what I was doing. The story and the characters were all like, my first time really having a grasp of it all. And the boss fight was one of my favorites as it was my first one, but also we all pitched in. We got like there's a game called Cthulhu Death May Die. It's like a board game. And they had an expansion where it's like a 2 foot tall statue basically is the game board. And it's completely unpainted. It's basically a 2 foot tall mini. And so
Okay.
got a dollar pitch in for that. One of our friends started painting it over like the months leading up to the big boss fight, and then that was the mini for the boss fight I had set up. It was a very, very epic conclusion, very fun boss fight, fun mini, great campaign. It kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of what my homebrew setting is now for all my players. They are a lot of like characters and NPCs that people meet. They're all based on my friends who made those characters, which is honestly how any campaign, any D&D campaign ends up getting created. Ask Gary Gygax.
Right, totally. Um, so after I believe it's like 1,100 plus games that you got under your belt, have you ever had one go off the rails? And if so, how'd you handle it?
Yeah, so both the times, professionally and not professionally, it goes off the rails. It's always because someone's too drunk. Had a campaign one time, had some like friends come over and they were interested in playing, so I joined. Like let them join. They joined just like a session, but one of them was just drunk the entire time, and I think we solved that one by one of our friends casting web and letting him get caught by the guards and everybody else running away. That was the not professional game. The professional game was also someone joining, and I don't think they fully comprehended how everything worked, and they just kind of wanted to jump in for one game. I think it might have been their birthday or like they were celebrating something. They wanted to come in and join. I'm like, okay, cool. Here's how it all works. Getting them set up, and then they show up. They're loud. They're drunk. They're just kind of cutting everybody off. Nobody really knows what they're doing. They're kind of a wild card, and then they were gone to the wind. I was like, okay. Option number two, I had a guy come in, immediately started fighting the other characters. Yep, he jumped in, and, I was like, okay. And, the characters were above him in a rope trick spell. The spell ended, and I was like, they fall on you, because that's where you are, and that's how you get introduced. He cast Fireball on himself, then started attacking everyone. They all said, wait, we're friends. He continues to attack, and then another round later is like, oh, okay, I guess we're friends. And they're like, okay, I guess we'll just move past this. Oh, look, the enemy's running away into this very ominous portal that we are not prepared to fight for. Well, I'm going to go in there. So it was a very, like, they didn't seem new, but I don't really know what they were doing. It was usually when someone's drunk or someone is just fighting other players. Those are the worst ones.
Okay. Well, it sounds like he was kind of being antagonistic at the beginning. So
Absolutely. He tried to play it off like, oh, I didn't know and I was scared, but like I sent you information that would not. You were like level 10. There's no reason you would act this way at level 10. It was very antagonistic. He lasted one session and then never came back.
oh goodness, yeah, I can see why.
Yep.
Well, okay, so since doing it since 2016, as long as you've been doing it, has there who or what has inspired your approach to game mastering when you first started? Do you have any role models?
I mean, it's a bit cliche, but when I started, I got introduced to this like a lot of people did, which was Critical Role.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I knew Matt Mercer from like video game stuff and knowing his voice, and then watching the story was kind of my introduction. I speed ran through a lot of Critical Role when it first came out. I came in at the second season, and that was basically most of my work time was just watching those. And so I got an idea, and I don't know. I don't think I ever really felt of the Matt Mercer effect or what that was. I just saw someone who told stories, and kind of like reading a book to be a better writer. Watching other people or listening to other people tell a story can give you ideas on what works with telling a story. How are they describing a scene? How, like, not mimicking, not just saying, I need to be Matt Mercer, I need to be Brandon Lee Mulligan, but what are some things they do that enthrall their players? What are the things they do that enthrall me listening to them speak? And trying to see what they're doing, not just copying what they're doing. So those guys are great storytellers. I don't really watch a lot of actual plays, but I mean, I love Critical Role. I love whenever Brendan Lee Mulligan comes in and guest stars. So I like to take notes from there and just try and take notes. Just try and be better and enthrall people with stories that way.
That's cool. That's very cool. Having the chance to be able to have some role models is to find some characteristics and traits that you like that you can be able to pull in and stuff like that. I think that says a lot about self-reflection and the desire to grow. So I commend you on that. That's really cool. All right. We're going to shift gears now and go into kind of your philosophy on game mastering. So one of the first questions we get is how do you balance narrative storytelling with player agency? What's your approach to that?
Yeah, so I intertwined that a lot. It's a bit different when you have these long running campaigns and people come and go. So I try to create the imprint of the narrative at the beginning based on who I have, based on their character backstories. It says, I have a world, I have ideas that could come about, but if you have a backstory where you already have a villain that I could use, well, great. I'll use that as a template, and I can kind of build off of that. I always tell people, you can send me a backstory with what you think happened in the past, and that may or may not be the case. So I use those backstories that they send me, the ideas that people already want to be incorporated into their story, and I'll use that as a template. Now, they might not be the first bad guy they meet, or they could be the first bad guy they meet. Their story could be something resolved at level 5. It could be something that's resolved at level 15.
Okay.
It really depends on where I would like to go with it. And I just use what the ideas that they have in their backstories and the ideas that the characters have, and then use those to create the framework for a general narrative idea. But in regards to their agency, failure is always an option. I will, I try to avoid single points of failures. I try to make it not be like, oh, you missed that one perception check, so the entire Thieves Guild gets away with it at the end. There are definitely ways you can fail, and there's ways you can succeed. There's ways you can succeed that I didn't think of. There's ways you can fail that I didn't think of. But I try to really let consequences happen and not try and sugarcoat them.
Okay.
If I create a lot of like, here's the hints, here's the scene, here's what the bad guy, I know what the bad guys are going to be doing. I've laid out as many hints as I can give you. If you ignore it, okay, things are going to happen. At the same time, if you do something that I didn't think of or the bad guy didn't think of, okay, I guess you win. Congratulations. I had, speaking of that very first campaign, it was a professional one. I had this whole set. It was the classic tearing up my notes and throwing them away. Had a whole setup. This guy was, attacking the city. They're in a time of war. He's like a gang leader taking over the docks. And their druid comes up. You know what? I'm just going to cast Tidal Wave. I'm just going to cast Tidal Wave and destroy the whole docks. I'm like, he's on one of the boats. Yep. He's just on one of them. There's many boats. Yeah, just destroy them all. We don't have time for this. I guess you win. He is defeated now. You'll see the ramifications of the docks not being there. But, I try and... If you want to make a decision, I'm going to let you make a decision, and you'll see what those consequences are. A lot of times it's fun. Sometimes you don't like it, but I'm going to let you, like my dad said, I'm going to give you enough rope to hang yourself with.
Nice. Man, that's pretty cool, actually. I have to admit. You've defeated my bad guy. Now we're going to go on to the next part. So cue next story arc.
Yeah.
All right. So, do you think a game master should prioritize the story, the rules, or the player's enjoyment? Why?
Definitely depends on the role of a GM that I'm playing. Because, if I'm playing in my home game, really the story that we're all trying to create is the most important thing. Being the arbiter of rules is kind of like being the referee when you're with your friends is that's your role in this dynamic. When it's a paid game, it's, in my opinion, it's entirely about player satisfaction, which is the most complex part of it all, because there's lots of things that make different players happy, and you have to balance in this situation, it's not just multiple friends that you're trying to get enjoyed. It's multiple people who are paying you money. They are paying good money to have an experience that they want. And when you have to balance that with more people, I have groups that are up to 8 people. I have to balance 8 people's wants and needs into a single session. A lot of times those groups work out because all 8 people like being around each other and will want the same things. But in regards to balancing, I think satisfaction. My job is to give you an entertaining time. You have paid me money to tell you a story and have a good time. If you have a good time by having combat and having a fun, thrilling, exciting battle, then that's what I'm going to have to give you. But if somebody else also wants the narrative, now I have to craft an interesting narrative around the combat to give them the satisfaction. Really, at that point, the story or the rules, none of that matters if people aren't having fun, if people aren't enjoying the story, if that's not what people are into the nitty-gritties. For example, I just had a game, fantastic session on my Monday game. We're running in the Critical Role setting. moving player to literal tears by how enthralled they were in the story, because we had a player death, and of course at the very moment, technically no one has the ability to resurrect this person, but in this exalted state that the character has, she just happens at that moment to level up before everybody else and get the ability to cast Revivify. If you're someone who's a stickler about the rules, if my job is to only care about the rules, well, like, technically you wouldn't level up until blah blah blah. Could be that, but everybody's enjoying the scene. Everybody's having a good time. That's what's more important in the situation.
Okay. So when you're running 11 games a week, I think you mentioned part of what you're doing, and you have, I assume, 3 to 5, 6 players per game with all the
Mm.
different personalities and different goals. How successful do you feel like you are in trying to balance out all the paid players' desires? I mean, does the guy that wants to combat and stuff like that sit there bored and disinterested while you are going through a role play part, or vice versa, where the guy that really likes role play, just kind of disengaged while you guys are doing combat? I mean, how do you find that balance? Is it just a matter of just feeling it out?
It's a matter of knowing your players a lot, and like I'm never perfect. I've definitely had people who are, they've kind of come in wanting combat, and unfortunately, the rest of the 7 people at that time all are in a role play like frenzy, and they're kind of going through like character stuff, and sometimes it doesn't work. I'm not going to say I'm perfect. I've definitely had people who've left because of that, but on the whole, I think I know my players well enough, and through talking to them, through seeing and engaging them both out of the game through my character channels, which I have private character channels for every single person who joins, so we can talk about your character, we can talk about you know things about the game meta wise that you'd
Okay.
like. Uh, so really, just open communication in my experience, talking to your players out of game and what they want to what they want to experience, and then also kind of testing them in game and seeing what they enjoy. If we go to a combat and I kind of go to them and they want to start doing something and I describe it in one way and they're really enthralled and really liking it, cool. Or I can start describing it that same exact way and maybe they're just kind of quiet, not engaging for like the 3 minutes I'm describing a scene. Well, okay, maybe they don't need all that description. Maybe they just kind of want to gamify it and do the thing and move on. So I think just communicating out of game and testing and communicating in game is the best way. So really, just as as lame of an answer as it is, it's just communication. I have a college degree that's specifically in communications, and that's what I specialize in.
All good, man. Sounds like you're well suited for this. All right. So when we're talking about your paid players specifically,
Hmm.
what are their expectations, and how do you create a sense of immersion for them? How do you hook them into your game?
So one of the things I have that starts everything off when they first join is like I said, I have my homebrew setting, and most of my games take place in that setting. So they are greeted. I have a setting guide, a full documentation on not only the world that they'll be playing in to get acquainted with my homebrew setting. It also has tons of character options. It's a 320-page setting guide right now, and there's literally hundreds upon hundreds of character options. There's dozens upon dozens of species, subclasses. There's new classes they can choose from. I try to give them something that they're here to play D&D, but if they just wanted to go play Forgotten Realms and just play whatever's on the PHB, they can go to Adventurers League. They want to know a story. They want to do something that makes them feel unique and individualized. And while there's obviously plenty of official content that does that, when you have a new setting, you kind of get it's like watching a new show, and it's much easier to get kind of involved in something that you've never experienced and know the rules of
Hmm.
than to just go in like, okay, I'll be somewhere in Forgotten Realms of the Sword Coast. Yeah, it's fantasy, whatever. Here you be like, oh, well, where do you want to be from? And usually I'll go with what's the idea you want to be, and then I can morph it into this setting and be like, oh wow, this is where I'm from. This is where this character is. And a lot of times they aren't making their characters off of, well, I'm from this setting and this whatever. They have ideas of like, oh, I was an orphan or I was part of a thieves. They have general ideas, and when you can lock that to something they don't have any previous context for, to them, at least in my experience, it feels more unique to them. They feel more like, oh, I'm part of this setting, and it really, in my experience, really immerses them. It gives them a sense of identity.
Okay. With as many games as you got rolling and as many players as you have, are you pretty much so? Do you have the same players showing up for the games, or do you have a pretty good mix of people coming in and out, per game?
It's usually pretty consistent. There are a couple people that are inconsistent, but they're consistently inconsistent. Uh, for the most part, it is regular people showing up. Games vary on how cohesive the groups are, and not in a bad way. Like the non-cohesive groups just don't like each other, but there's groups that I like to say they are cohesive enough. I can just tap, and they will just go for miles. If I set up a scene, they will role play with themselves and the scene that I can just sit back. There's time, my Friday group, my Wednesday group, and my Saturday group. Three groups that I think have the best cohesion with themselves. They love role playing with each other. They love hanging out with each other, and they love the setting that they're in. That they have a story, and then they can talk and role play with each other and their characters' lives enough that there's sometimes I'm sitting there for just 30 minutes just watching them role play, just so having them watching them have fun, and then they say, "Oh, I want to do this." Okay, yeah, you give me a check. All right, yeah, that's what's going on, and then 15 minutes of them playing with that. And those are the best games when you can see them enjoying your world and enjoying what you've given them. That they make their own fun with it. Some games you kind of got to push them along. They don't really have the cohesion as much. They're not enjoying it, but maybe the RP isn't as connected as other games.
Okay.
Uh, but yeah, it's usually the same people that love playing those games. It's not usually usually not a rotating board.
All right, that works. Um, okay, so how do you create your immersion? I mean, do you find that it's storytelling? Is it the role play from the characters? Is it a kind of a combination of good maps and ambient music? I mean, what have you found?
Definitely music. So the staples I always have. I mean, I always have D&D Beyond character sheets. Always have a Roll20 tabletop. Always have music. Discord and YouTube like to make it very difficult to get a good music bot into Discord, but music is always it's always a necessity. It feels wrong almost if I don't have some sort of music playing when I'm speaking to really set the scene, and that also just helps the immersion. Just also people just like the music depending on if you play good tracks or not. So when the battle starts, got to change it up to the battle music. Can't have the peaceful ambient walking around music when you have a tense scene in negotiations or a cut scene. You want to change it to some sort of suspense. So definitely music. And I find when it comes to the maps, you're not always. It's a bit different when you're online, but you're not always on a battle. You're not always doing something tactical that you need to have a physical like battle map to do. But you want to have some sort of image or something to set the scene for where you are, considering you're not at an actual table and you can't like gesticulate so much. So I find, I have world maps. I have custom made world maps for my settings, but then as well, like cutscene maps. So, if they're in the tavern, just having a map set up of just an image of the tavern that they're in. If like your background, if they're in a cave or in a dungeon and there's not necessarily a map for it, it's just a cave background. If they're underwater, you put an underwater thing. Uh, as well, battle maps for actual combat. I always use battle maps. I I don't. I very rarely do theater of the mind battle unless it's just like a single entity for something quick. But good battle maps, good music, and just good background images just to set the scene really keeps everyone focused and not straying too far. Granted, I don't know what people are doing on the other sides, but on the side of the screen. But as far as I can tell, everyone's still paying attention, pretty immersed. No one really is straying away and doing other things, and I've found success with it.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Most controversial question we have out here. You ready
Mm-hmm.
for this?
You
What is your philosophy or your stance on fudging dice rolls as a game master?
I don't.
Okay.
I The only time I really would fudge it is if like there's a scenario where I generally think this like an NPC. I never fudge it against like if a player's like they know I'm making a roll against them. I'm not gonna hide it and be like, oh, sorry, they succeeded. It usually would only come if I'm debating if something needs a roll. Like there's an enemy that knows they're coming and he's going to be waiting to sneak up for them. Okay, let me roll stealth and see. Oh, he rolled really bad stealth at advantage. Does he really need to break the roll? He's been here for an hour knowing they're coming. He knows the terrain. I'll just say he's hidden. That's the only time I'd really fudge a roll, and it's really more of just making a narrative decision that
Right.
something need a roll to begin with. But I never fudge a roll against a player if I need to be making a roll. If I'm rolling an attack against them, they're going to see the attack. If I'm rolling, a save against them, they're going to see the save. I'm never going to say no. They're never going to see a fudge die roll. They may suddenly see something has a legendary resistance.
Okay. That works. Okay, we're gonna kind of sidestep now to another topic. We're gonna talk about
Hmm.
crafting worlds and narratives. So,
Sure.
what's your approach to building your campaigns? Do you build top down or bottom up? In other words, do you have a big map and say we're starting here, or is it a case of okay, you guys are in this village, and from there you kind of expand out? What's your feelings on that?
It's definitely when I looked at that question, I realized I definitely work bottom up because I don't usually say or predetermine where a campaign is going to start when I set up for a new campaign. I base it on what the backstory of the players want to be. So if I have five, because in my setting, I have there's two different worlds, like actual worlds they can go to and traverse between in
Mm-hmm.
space, and if I have four people that all are from one world, I'm not going to just say, all right, well, we're setting it here because I want to tell a story in this place. It wouldn't make any sense for all four of these characters to happen to be meeting each other at a place that it would be rare for them to ever be in the first place. So I definitely start at okay, where are these small players, these small characters all meeting? Where is that going to begin? And then what sort of narrative could be existing where they're at? And then, all right, if this leads to that sort of narrative, what happens along this path that could branch out somewhere more, somewhere more, somewhere more? So definitely from the bottom out.
Okay, very cool. Um, for we're talking NPCs now. How do you make your NPCs memorable? What do you do?
Quite simply, find one thing that can make them different. It doesn't. You don't need to have a kooky accent with unique hair and a different outfit and a cool story. If you have like a magic shop, I have this one character everybody loves. I based her off of my grandmother. Her name is Lindell. She's this strangely everywhere magic shop owner who owns a series of shops. However, every time you go to a different shop, it is her at a different time in her life. So when you meet her at her main shop, she's this old retired, think like 1940s, 50s Hollywood star, big
Okay.
long robes, way out of date. That's what she's like. This woman who's lived a thousand lifetimes and is selling what she has. But you go to another continent, you go to a different shop. There she is, same woman, but now she's in the prime of her career. She's this debutante who everybody loves and is all about town. And that's the different thing. That's something that makes her unique. Go to another shop. Well, this one, he has curly hair and a thin mustache and plays a melodica. His name's Tom Cardiff. Doesn't happen to be like a certain YouTube celebrity. Just find one thing. The shop doesn't have to be entirely unique. They don't have to have all the radical clothes. Just one unique personality trait, something different that makes them like different than just a normal regular guy. It could be a quirky personality. They could have a pet. Literally, pets are one of the easiest ways to make people remember them. Just say they have some quirky little thing that's in their shop that's a pet. They'll remember them forever.
Okay.
So, one thing. Just make one different thing, and you can make them memorable forever.
I think that's excellent advice. That's something that I will try and consider and incorporate in my future games. That's all right. What advice do you have for GMs who are struggling to improvise during their sessions?
So a tip, it's more of like a little like in the moment trick. You're struggling, say you're like they've walked into a town and like, oh, what's this place look like? What are the buildings like? And you're just like, they're buildings and they're stone, I guess. I tell people just take a breath, stop trying to like word vomit everything. Just stop, close your eyes. You are walking where they are walking. What do you see? I all right. Streets are cobblestone. The buildings are wooden because it's not that popular of a town. So you see that the signs are kind of cracked, and there's not that many people out on the streets right now. There's one in the far corner, and behind it there's a fountain. You would see like two kids playing around it. You're not thinking of like, oh, what do they see? It's what you're seeing. What is your train of thought? And just say what your train of thought is. Don't try to be this perfect wordsmith and try and describe to them. Don't try and be God looking down at what the players see. Try to just be the player. You are now just describing what you're seeing. And I find that to be the best way to, like, if I'm in a rut or just talking too much without saying much, just taking a breath and getting yourself into that moment is the easiest way to start improvising.
Okay, that works. All right, so most of the audience here are professional GM wannabes, like me,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
next set of questions are going to be kind of gearing towards that. So,
Okay.
tell me, what does the day of a pro GM look like for you?
So for me, I do this full time. I don't have any other jobs, so I usually start my day making sure that any sessions I have, I only have like one morning session, so usually my mornings are waking up, making sure the afternoon and evening session, making sure the encounters on D&D Beyond are set, because I use their encounter builder. Go to Roll20, make sure any combat maps that I'll need are going to be out, because really the only mechanical thing I need to do on there is for combat. Anything else is just theater of the mind and my notes. So making sure I got my notes there and making sure for combat, I usually try to have what I anticipate to be the next two or three combats in mind. Because I'll have a general structure, but who knows how long it'll take for them to actually get through that. I've had times where I've sat down, I planned out this whole thing, like, okay, they'll probably get through this session, and then for 6 months I was getting through what I had planned out. So, uh, yeah, I would say morning is preparation, and then afternoon and evening is actual playthrough.
Got it. What does your business model look like? I mean, do you have a business model?
I mean, quite frankly, it's get people in. I use Reddit, D&D Beyond, and Roll20. I use their forums mainly for advertising. Those are where most of the people are at. A couple other like Facebook groups and stuff like that, but they're not really as popular. Usually, I'll use my scheduling software to schedule those out many days in advance. And I mean, I run. The good part is it's kind of like the way I've described my business model, the way I kind of like operate. It's kind of like being a personal trainer.
Okay.
You have people that you work with at certain times, and then you go and you do that thing with the person, and then they pay you money. And my goal, I mean, ever since I was able to start doing it full time in 2023, is just have I'm doing it full time. I don't have anything else I'm doing on these days, so I have as much availability as possible, and that's why I have a game every single day, except for one day a week. So I try to just keep as much availability as possible. Try to keep the slots open and trying to find the right times that people are in.
But
And
I say you just kind of mentioned earlier, you likened it to like being a professional trainer. How do people react when you tell them you're a professional game master?
uh, I've I've yet to see anybody who doesn't think it's cool.
Okay.
Most of the time, like, granted, I'm talking to people around my age who are also interested in similar hobbies. But I mean, my parents who have no knowledge of D&D or anything like that, they think it's cool. They think it's great. They think it's great that I'm doing something for myself, and I'm happy with it. Other people I ask, like, they say, like, "Oh, what do you do?" It's, "Oh, I'm a professional dungeon master." Like, what? That's a thing? That's
Right.
amazing. That is a thing. I think and I was the same way. I had heard about it before I had started. I had heard about this sort of thing, and the one thing I tried to do when I started, because I had had negative experiences with people who said they were paid or professional dungeon masters by people like, "Hey, come for a campaign," and then like one session later, like, "Oh, this is the paid campaign, by the way. If you want to do the rest, jumping on you." So I tried really hard to be as like ethical as possible and upfront and direct about what I'm charging, what you're getting, and all that sort of stuff. And that got really good, and so I'm happy that when I tell people like this is what I do, I don't feel like skeezy or anything like that when I explain it.
Okay, very cool. Um, how do you handle no shows? I know with many games you've had under your belt, you've had to have had people, you know, for no reason
Oh yeah.
show up or short term notice and stuff like that. When you're dealing with a paid game, you got other people that are paying for the experience, and their campaign mates don't show up. How do you handle that?
So I'm Start Playing has their policy, which is usually you have to have 24 full hours before the session starts to skip the session. I'm more generous. If you just at least tell me the day before, if I at least just know the day before, so I have some time, like a night to think about things or something like that, that's fine. If you 11:59 for a 10 a.m. session the next day, if you say, "Hey, I got a doctor's appointment. Hey, I'm feeling really sick. Hey, any reason," that's fine. And usually I handle no shows. I ask the group when they aren't showing up if it's more than one person. I usually just say, okay, these people just aren't going to be here. I'll make up an excuse in game why they aren't there, unless the group says it's okay, we'll play them, and the other people have their permission to do so. For my Friday games, sometimes people don't show up, and they all are cohesive enough to say it's okay, we'll just play them if a fight comes up. Sometimes I'll just take control if the group doesn't really have as much D&D knowledge or isn't as comfortable playing them. If it's just one person, I'll say it's okay, I'll have them here if they have to be there. If there's a legitimate reason why they don't need to be there, I usually just will be like, "Oh, they're doing this for this reason.
Okay.
They're watching." Usually the excuse is they're watching your flank. They're making sure no one comes up behind you, so you guys go do this. And that's usually a perfectly fine. Just everybody knows like they're not there, and it's their responsibility to play that character. If they want me, and again, I usually did say, "Do you want me to play the character?" Because if you feel like I'm not comfortable if this person isn't in the fight for us, okay, I'll play the character then because they need to be there. Um, but financially, if you give me at least a day before, I'll gladly skip you. And if you're not there, usually you'll just be out, or if you're okay with it, the other players will just play you.
Yeah, I can see that. Oh man, sorry you weren't there. We played your character, and I'm just so sorry. Yeah.
I'm usually cognizant, like on a meta perspective. I usually try not to murder the person who's not
Right.
there, target them. Uh, but yeah, no, it's usually handled pretty well, and I usually give plenty of time for you to like let me know if you're not going to be able to make it.
Okay. Do you have as much fun running professional games as you did when you were first playing just running games for your friends?
I do. I Ever since I was a kid, my dream was always just to tell stories, and I used to think that was being like a novelist and writing novels. But really, my creative outlet was fulfilled with this game, with D&D and tabletop RPGs, and this form of storytelling and this form of writing content really works well with me, and so I love it. I get to be a performer every single day. I can imagine it's how like an actor might feel, and getting people. You get positive feedback. If you have good players, they say thank you. They say how much they like certain things. Like I literally said, I had a player move to tears during one of the scenes. Like you would see, like on Critical Role, when they start crying when a player dies and things get dramatic. And that It's weird to say that it feels good to make someone cry, but it feels good to tell a compelling story and to have people be happy and be fulfilled and get enjoyment out of something that you are doing for them. So
Yeah.
I still very much enjoy it just as much as when I was playing home games,
Okay.
and I
So,
still play home games.
well, okay. With as many games as you got going in your different groups, have you experienced burnout? Do you experience burnout? How do you deal with it?
It comes and goes. It's usually whenever there's like a creative lull where maybe I'm just not spark isn't there on with so many different stories you got to come up with I got 10 different games right now. I got
Right.
10 different stories. And, sometimes it's a little bit easier. Like, when I have a module that I'm running, I kind of just resort to that. But when I got to come up with a story myself and maybe I'm in a rut, I'm like, okay, I have no ideas right now. That's when the burnout starts to kick in, when I kind of got to go session after session after session each day. Like, that's when the grind starts. You start pushing it. But then once it starts it comes and goes. It's never gonna. I don't feel it's ever just gonna go away forever. Uh, Sometimes I'm just not getting the ideas. Sometimes there's not a something that I'm seeing. I haven't looked at something that's igniting any sort of inspiration. But I know that if I keep chugging, I know if they keep progressing, so there's going to be something that will spark. There's going to be something interesting I'll see that'll come along. There will be a piece of media that maybe I'll consume that has an interesting idea that I'll want to utilize. There's always going to be something that'll spark the ideas again,
Very good.
and just kind of pushing through that. Just like anything, it's never going to be perfect all the way through. You're never going to always have the best ideas ever. You're never going to have your greatest story moments every single week, and just pushing through those and trying to find ways to entertain your players when you don't have the most creative capacity is something that I think is the hardest thing, but something that you always got to push through.
Okay. We're gonna skip gear or switch gears. It's not skip gears. Switch gears, and let's talk about the role of the professional game master on the online tabletop role playing community.
Okay.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing game masters in our modern TTRPG community?
This was a tough one. I'm not the most plugged in to what other GMs really need. Uh, the biggest challenge, I guess, would say just keeping up with so much content, with how popular D&D gets. As more and more popularity comes to it, there's more and more stuff out there, more and more good stuff, more and more good third-party content, and it's hard enough being on top of every single thing that Wizards of the Coast puts out and being like, I know how Dungeons and Dragons work, and I know how my homebrew stuff with Dungeons and Dragons work. But then to be like, okay, I understand my balance, and I understand how Wizards of the Coast likes to balance. Now I got to figure out how Global Press likes to balance their content. Now I got to figure out how Hit Point Press likes to balance. It's and everyone can say like, oh well, it's Dungeons and Dragons and they're good. Like yeah, but especially as a someone who likes to make content for Dungeons and Dragons as a professional DM, there's there's a lot of wiggle room in the rules and how you make things that dictate how balance and how it works, and being able to keep up with that is a lot. But I think that's probably the hardest challenge is just because I got a player come in like, hey, can I play an Illrigger? I'm like, oh my god, I haven't looked at an Illrigger class. I gotta look at the Illrigger class now. Let's see how this fits into how I like to play. And it's not so much like not trusting that something is balanced. It's more so, is it balanced for how you like to run your game?
Okay. All right. How has the rise of actual play content and streaming impacted the way you approach your game mastering?
Mentioned at the beginning, but I think it's been generally positive having, like I said, people to look up to and use as role models
Okay.
and see, to learn lessons from. If you didn't have these things, we didn't have Critical Role, we didn't have Dimension 20, we didn't have all these other actual plays, all these live plays, all these shows, you really wouldn't get to see how other people do things as much. You'd kind of just be left to like Reddit RPG horror stories about what other people like bad things that people do. And I think this is a great way to show what people who do know what they're doing and good creative people and good storytellers can do, and give you more ways and more ideas on how to do things. I think it's a net positive. It gives more good examples.
Very cool. What role do you think that professional game masters play in shaping the TTRPG landscape?
I was struggling with that because I don't really know if it's our place to shape the
Well, say you're
landscape.
going to have an implication one way or the other. Just the fact that you
Yeah.
are a professional game master in itself, I mean, a few years ago, unheard of. Caused a lot of debate between game masters like, oh, I'd never change for my game, and other ones like, well, you should pay for my time. It creates as a professional game master, you do have an impact on the community out there. Um,
It's so the way I would describe it, the way the way question, how do we shape the landscape? And I kind of took it more like a little bit of like an analogy, a little bit of a metaphor. Like we don't shape the landscape, the
okay.
players, and we shape it as players, but like the players and obviously Wizards of the Coast people make it. They are the ones who shape how the game is played, how people like playing it. And I think it's really more of our job to be those expert guides of that landscape. It's our job to know this is what people like, and to get you through the right path, to show you the best routes, to show you the really should be being the expert guides, the experts of that landscape. Because if we're not, and we're just people who are trudging through making our paths and seeing what sticks and what not and trying to be like, this is how we should play the game, we're just like every single other person who's also trudging through and making a path, when our job as paid GMs should be, we aren't making these new paths. We aren't going to try and tell you this is how you should play the game and this is how we should shape the game going forward. This is how, this, that, and the other thing. We should be taking these players, these people who wish for guides, and guiding them through for the best experience they're going to get in the landscape that they want to be in.
Okay.
If somebody wants the most direct route possible through that landscape, kind of gamified, we should be able to be those expert guides. Be like, this is how we can get you that best experience. If we want someone who wants the most scenic route, the most RP heavy, we should be the guides to show them how in this landscape and how people like to play, you can get that fulfillment. So I think our role is more of being the experts of the landscape rather than the people. Well, obviously we will be shaping it regardless, but I think the job we should be taking is more of knowing how to guide through the game and guide through to get the experience rather than trying to shape it ourselves.
Okay. How do you feel about the responsibility of representing diversity and inclusion in your games?
Well, as a cis straight white man, I am the embodiment of representation. I think it's important. I have a very diverse collection of clients that are, they're on the spectrum. They are LGBTQIA, all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds, different gender identities, sexual orientations. And to me, they're all just great players. And that doesn't mean, though, that everyone can just be, well, it just doesn't matter just to have anybody be anywhere. Obviously, not every single instance of an NPC or every single instance you meet someone has to be a diverse impact. It doesn't have to just be, oh, the cashier that is taking your gold, well, they're actually a bisexual, independent mother of 5. Like, you don't have to make every single thing about diversity. They can just be a person. But when you do have NPCs that you are putting more time into and you're crafting them, they don't need to just be reflections of yourself or whatever you think everyone else is like. They can be reflections of your players. They can be reflections of people who you aren't. They can just be reflections of other people you know exist in the world, and it's important that those players see that your world isn't just a bunch of you, a bunch of cis heterosexual white guys sitting around waiting to be talked to. I try to use these different aspects of a gender identity or relation or sexual orientation as just different, almost like a different skin that someone can have. They are just an aspect of the NPC. So I'll make an NPC, and sometimes they're maybe missing an arm, sometimes maybe they're deaf, sometimes maybe they're gay, sometimes they're bisexual. They can have different traits and different flavors about themselves. It doesn't mean you're making everything diverse or anything like that. It just means you're showing different people who's not yourself.
You're trying to create memorable NPCs. Totally
Exactly.
get that. Totally get that. All right. What advice would you give to aspiring GMs looking to make a name for themselves online?
If they figure it out, can they tell me?
Dude, with 11 games running, sounds like you're doing something right.
I definitely have a good stream of players. I have a good impact in getting people to come here. I think a lot of that for paid GMs, it's reviews. It's a lot of those people, just like Amazon shopping. They want to know what's your best review, and I mean, I'm proud to say I have a 5.0 on Start Playing. I don't think I have anything less than a stellar review, and those are good things to see. If I had any bad reviews, they'd be up there just as well. But you get reviews. If you're trying to be a paid GM, the reviews are really the currency. People want to see that people have good things to say about you. Consistency is also important. Like I said, I use Reddit is hard to schedule for. They don't exactly have Facebook and Twitter pre-scheduling things. You got to use some third-party softwares with their API permissions. But consistency, post. I have games running every week, which means I can post once every 24 hours. Every 24 hours, I'm posting to those groups. I'm getting, my degree is technically in marketing, so I know how important it is to make sure you are consistently showing and promoting yourself, even if it's just simple as a post saying, "Hey, I have games running at these times." Just make those posts. Don't just sit there and be like, "Well, it's on Start Playing. Hopefully, someone sees it." You got to make sure you're spreading your name out as much as you can.
Okay, very cool. Um, last question: what's your vision for the future of tabletop RPGs, and how do you see yourself contributing to that evolution?
Um, I definitely see it growing more. It's already on a growing path. The most recent edition was like the most popular edition. The update to the edition is the most popular set of books they've released ever. So I definitely see it growing. I see it becoming more mainstream, you could say,
Okay.
and it's a good thing. Uh, some people might think, some GMs might think that's a worrying thing. Like, oh, if everybody's into it, then there's gonna be so many GMs, and then there's nobody's gonna want that. I think there's always gonna be a spot for us paid GMs. Just like, yeah, anybody can go and watch a video on yoga, but sometimes you want to go and pay for an instructor to lead you the class. So you can always try and find a random person online, or you and your friends can try and do it. But sometimes you want an instructor to lead the class. Um, my role, I would love to see, a lot of my content. I have a lot of content for my players. I have a lot of content on my Patreon, a lot of content on my website that I'm trying to develop into books. I'd love to have my setting become a staple one day, and third party content, much like Brackenheim, or the settings from Kobold Press or Magehand Press, who are I love a lot of Magehand Press's content. Um, that would be my goal. That would be my dream, would be to be part of that community and be part of those creators. That's what I guess I hope to become, is a very professional, talented GM with very professional creative works.
Very cool. Snack Daddy, take a couple of minutes to just plug some of your stuff, man. What do you got going on? What do you want people to know about?
All right, yeah. So I mean, you can find me on startplaying.games,
Of which
SnackDaddy
we
Games.
will have a link for your profile, and we'll make sure we have a link for your Snack Daddy games as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, so you can find me on Start Playing Games. I post on Reddit a lot at Snack Daddy Games. And you can also find me on Patreon, same exact name, Snack Daddy Games. I post every single month. There's always something new coming out. It can either be, this month we're going to be coming out with a lot of new spells. A couple months ago we had a 100-page packet about different monsters and creations and stuff like that. So always stuff going on, stuff for my setting that you can use in your setting, stuff for DMs, stuff for players, everything updated, old, 5e, 5e24, and you can find that at Snack Daddy Patreon, as well as snackdaddygames.com. I have my website up and working on updates every day.
Very cool. Well, Snack Daddy, thank you so much for joining us on Behind the Grind. It has been a pleasure to meet with you and to listen. You have a lot of good advice, I think, that people could benefit from. And I could definitely say you would have an impact in the community. So,
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on here.
well, once again, guys and gals, thank you for joining us. We'll be signing off here shortly. But like I said earlier, it's just as a reminder, please, to smash that like button like it's a mimic. Share it like loot and subscribe before the bard steals the spotlight. Man, if you got questions for Snack Daddy or me and stuff like that, put them on the bottom. We're glad to communicate. We're always looking for different ideas. If you've got questions you want to ask people, if you've got just some ideas and concepts you want us to explore and stuff like that, we want to give you guys what you're looking for. So, like I said, guys, check out his material. It's definitely worth, I think that we benefit from his wisdom. So, thank you so much, folks, and we'll see you soon.
See you. Thank you.